Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Under the Spell podcast. I'm Stephen Mitchell. I'll be your host this afternoon, and I'm joined by Mbali Shamu, who's one of the real rising stars at Monocle. Background in ecos, having done your master's in economics, and someone who's been a big part of the Monocle life and culture for the past couple of years. So it's really great to have you here to talk a bit about the content out of our CEO and co-authors' brains, so David Buckham and Robin Wilkinson. And I think this book has given us a lot to talk about, is a broad spectrum of content. And I know you've read some of David and Robin's previous work. How did you find this book in comparison? And were there a couple of kind of key themes that really stuck with you?
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And yeah, definitely, it's always interesting to find out what is happening in David's mind. I think all of us can attest to the fact that he does have a fascinating mind.
Sure.
And I think from his previous offerings, my favorite so far have been Why Banks Fail and The End of Money. And I feel like David is a very good storyteller. He has the ability to link things that happened in the past to give us an ability to make sense of what is happening now, And with this book, it's still the same. You know, he's taken us through, various themes of things that happened in the past, helping us to make sense of what is happening currently. So yeah, it was quite a fascinating read.
Yeah, especially how different The End of Money and Why Banks Fail being more financial focused. David working, leading a consultancy within banking. Obviously, that's going to be within his wheelhouse. This book's quite different, though, in terms of all of the different facets that it touches, and it's almost more a history and philosophy book. And I think one of the things that really stood out is in kind of that range of content is the different opinions, the opposing narratives that we have, and we're often at odds in the way that we think about certain things. Particularly, I know you mentioned the kind of the concept of language and how we learnt, and from that how we try and understand the world behind us, around us. Why did that stand out for you, and kind of what were your key lessons you gleaned from that part of the book?
Yeah, definitely. I think to start off that question, we need to go back to the fundamental themes that the book highlights. It speaks about human progress and how the West has lost its soul, right? And going back to human progress is trying to understand how we as human beings have gotten to the point where we have gotten now. And that speaks to how our ideologies have changed over time. And when we go back to the chapter where he's speaking about language, right, he unpacks the two opposing themes that are equally as fascinating, right? Where we have Skinner speaking about how, we as human beings, we learn language. We learn language through interacting with the world, right? He made an example about how children learn words through the words they learn language through the words that have been passed down to them, right? But then on the opposite side, we have Chomsky, who actually says that actually human beings have an innate ability to learn language, right? And he says that the way in which we interact with the world, we subconsciously, mix that with what we know innately, right? And then that kind of goes to explain a lot about how human beings, two human beings can be exposed to the same circumstances, but they can come out with different conclusions, right? And that then kind of explains how, political leaders today, they can be exposed to the same kind of information, but they can come out with completely different views. And I found that to be quite fascinating. And it's quite interesting that David was able to, bring that out in the book. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. And I, as someone with small children, it's incredible watching how their brains work when it comes to language, and how they seem to pick up things from just listening and experiencing what their parents think and say, and how their little brains work from such a young age to be able to develop insights and understandings.
Exactly.
And I think another kind of childhood story, I guess, is young Sheldon. And we were laughing about some of those episodes because the book talks about the Big Bang Theory, and in particular Sheldon, and how he held this strong view around string theory and dedicated his life to it, but had this moral crisis when it dawned on him that perhaps string theory wasn't correct, or wasn't going to be the defining theory that he thought it was. What was your take on that story and the use of Big Bang Theory in the book?
Well, when I saw the chapter about Sheldon, I was really excited because I grew up watching The Big Bang Theory, and I recently started watching Young Sheldon, so when I saw it, I was so excited. But yeah, definitely, I think the moral story of what David highlights in the book is the dilemma that we as human beings face when we realize that, okay, I've spent and invested so much, of my life, of my time, of my resources in this idea, right? Only to find out that, actually it was not worth it, right? And to extend that from beyond just the personal, view to even like a worldview,
Yes.
right? Where we find leaders who hold on to certain ideologies, and it begs the question to say, do they know when to really let go, right? And examples can be, for instance, Donald Trump, right? Examples can be, for instance, the Russian-Ukraine war, right? I think at the beginning of the war, Russia was, convinced that if we pursue this, we're going to win over Ukraine. But 2 years down the line, they're still fighting. And it's just one example to say, okay, do our leaders know when to let go? And it goes back to a concept that we, dearly, use in economics called sunken costs, right? Do leaders know when to let go when they have, put so much resources and time and everything else, but only to find out that it's not yielding results? And I think opposite of that is an example that is very much close to home is South Africa. We were able to, pull out our troops when we realized that, it's no longer benefiting us to keep our troops in the DRC versus M23 war, for example. So it's just about, those themes that David is highlighting in the book to say, okay, do leaders really know when to let go?
Yeah.
So I think him using, the Sheldon scenario to bring that out was quite fascinating.
No, absolutely. And I think human beings often think they know more than they actually know. And personally, for me, reading the book, you work through all these different phases in history, where you often have these leaders or individual making decisions that have impacted the world in a massive way, and often it's done with a lot of conviction and best intentions, but it doesn't always turn out quite the way we do, and we've seen that in many examples where perhaps we don't actually know as much as we should to make those kind of decisions. I know you're active on social media. How do you think social media impacts the way that we think and make these kind of decisions, or make these kind of leaps of faith in our own understanding about the world?
I think before we, put social media, we bring social media into the conversation, much of what we think and how we view the world stems from what we were taught in the home, right? And what we were taught in our homes goes back to what our parents were taught,
Sure.
and what the previous generations were taught. And this is, I think, David also highlights it in the book that the way in which we view the world is very much informed by the stories that we've been told. And I think we are in a space where, especially now, where social media is now driving the storytelling narrative, right? And it can be both positive and negative depending on how you engage with social media. And I feel like we need to be very intentional about our consumption of social media, especially in the age of fake news, right? Especially in the age where now even governments, diplomatic conversations are now taking place on social media, right? So I think we just need to be very intentional as a generation to say, okay, we do understand that what we interact with on social media shapes our narrative. Are we aware of that? As a basic foundation, are we aware that what we interact with on social media actually informs our narrative about the world? And once we've come to that understanding, we need to be intentional about, okay, how do I engage with this going forward? Because it can either be to your benefit or to your detriment, and not only just you, but the generations that are to come, after you. So.
It's about being intentional and critical as well in the way that we think about these things. And as you said, fundamentally, it's all forms of storytelling. In this book, we get an opportunity to have been told a lot of different stories throughout our history, and from interesting philosophers or interesting leaders from the past. I know that you're a history buff and you enjoy history. Are there any of the stories that stood out for you, or you were able to find some meaning in modern day life from what you read from our history?
Yeah, definitely. I think the chapter that stood out for me from a historical perspective is the creation of the State of Israel. And I think more than anything, what stood out for me there was the story of, human triumph, right? That even in the midst of, the most dire situations, if a nation or a human spirit decides that I'm going to persevere, to be able to make it on the other side, no matter how badly the odds may be stacked up against them, if they have that willingness within them, they can still do it. And going back to the example of Israel, when Israel was fleeing from persecution, right, and they were looking for a place to settle, they were not, tourists, they were not people who were well off. These are people who were literally fleeing from war. They were wounded, persecuted and all of that. But even in the midst of that, they were still able to find a place to settle, and not just settle, but find a way to thrive, And in addition to that, it's not only limited, to the nation of Israel. Even with our country, post-apartheid, we were able to find a way to be able to come together and to, build a new future. And there are many examples, even with Rwanda, even with Japan after the World War II, So there are many different examples that we can draw from. But from the book, what stood out was, the nation of Israel and how it was able to create its own state.
A lot of it is these stories of human perseverance and human endeavor, and how through that society is able to progress and move forward. And I think here in South Africa we've got a lot of challenges ourselves. One of the most unequal, if not the most unequal country in the world. Having read this book, are there any insights that you feel you've been able to gain that you think could help positively influence our situation here in South Africa?
Yeah, definitely. I think going back to one of the earlier chapters, where David is speaking about the theories that Thomas Malthus, came up with or brought about, when you were speaking about the balance between population growth and food scarcity, right? And I think as economists we always think about resources and the population, but I think we have come to a place where now it's about understanding the context of each nation. right? It's understanding our context as a nation to say, for us to get to, in business analysis terms, we call it, the desired state,
Yes.
right? For us to be able to move from where we are to where we need to be, we need to first understand where is it that we need to be and what are the steps that we need to take in order to get to where we need to be, right? And I think that is where we are currently lacking, where there are policies that are, being discussed and put into place, but are they really speaking to the desired state? And I feel like that is where there's a mismatch, right?
Yeah.
We speak a lot about the reason behind the inequality, right, is the high levels of unemployment that we have. But when we look at what is the reason behind the high levels of unemployment that we have, firstly, it's because there aren't, enough job opportunities, and secondly, there's a skills mismatch, right? So how do we as a country implement policies that are going to be able to fix that?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that in the book where David is speaking about Malthus, what it highlights is the mismatch between what is currently happening, right, on the ground and what our policy, makers are seeing or what they are planning. So I feel like if we can fix that gap, what is happening on the ground, what is the reality on the ground, and what our policymakers, are seeing, then if the two can match each other, we can progress. And I think that's what, nations like Japan have been able to quite successfully achieve.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're completely right that it's so context specific, and there's no one answer for all situations, which makes it difficult in a country like South Africa where we have so much diversity. It's a strength, but there's so many voices in the room that need to be understood, and it becomes more and more important for people to exchange and share ideas and have conversations in order for us to understand those different voices in the room. And I think that's the power of having a book like this, is it allows people like you and I to sit and have a conversation and to share ideas and opinions. And I think out of that, we're going to be able to find better solutions for our country.
Yes.
If you were to try and sell this book to one of your friends and tell them why they should go and give it a read, what would you say? What would you try and hook them with?
I mean, that would be very easy. Considering the fact that, it speaks about how we get to progress as humanity, right? And in addition to that, it speaks about how the West has lost its soul. And I think in the recent years, we've become more interested in what is happening in the West, because what is happening there affects what is happening here,
Sure.
right? But in addition to that, I love how David makes it easy for you to follow what he's saying. Many times when you read these types of books, it becomes quite difficult to put two and two together.
Yeah.
But David makes it so easy, right? And I love that he uses characters that we are so familiar with. I mean, there's a chapter about Superman.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, definitely. It's a good book. It's told well, and it tells a story that is compelling. And anyone who's interested in learning about human progression, human history, and learning about the West is definitely gonna love it.
Absolutely. And I think you're completely right of how it's able to use what often feels like quite lighthearted stories to make quite some serious points, and doing it in a way to not tell us how to think, but rather give us some tools to better understand the world. So yeah, I think there's a lot for us to learn and gain from reading this book, for, as I said, having conversations like this. So I really do appreciate you coming here, sharing some of your opinions, telling us a little bit about what you think about the book. And I hope that everyone else gets to read it and enjoy it as much as you did.
Thank you, Steve.
Great.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.